The man sat stoically at one end of the table, carefully crafting his replies to the FBI agent's inquiries. He wasn't considered a major suspect in the murder case. His alibi was believable and he sounded sincere, but the agent pressed on nevertheless. With the suspect's consent, he was asked a series of questions about the murder weapon. If you had committed this crime, would you have used a gun? If you had committed this crime, would you have used a knife? If you had committed this crime, would you have used an ice pick? If you had committed this crime, would you have used a hammer? One of the weapons, the ice pick, had actually been used in the commission of the crime, but that information had been kept from the public. Thus, only the killer would know which object was the real murder weapon. As the FBI agent went down the list of weapons, he observed the suspect carefully. When the ice pick was mentioned, the man's eyelids came down hard and stayed down until the next weapon was named. The agent instantly understood the significance of the eyelid behavior he had witnessed. And from that moment forward, the minor suspect became the primary person of interest in the investigation. He later confessed to the crime. Chalk one up for Joe Navarro, a remarkable human being who, in addition to unmasking the ice pick killer, is credited with catching scores of criminals, including master spies, in a distinguished 25-year career with the FBI. How was he able to do this? If you asked him, he would quietly say, I owe it to being able to read people. Joe, you have a skill that not many people have at its highest level. When did you know you had this skill of being able to read people at a high level?
Wow, DJ. First of all, thank you for having me on your program. That's a difficult question to answer because at that high level, it took a while to get there. I remember as a young man, we my family came to the United States as refugees from Cuba. I didn't speak English; none of us did, but it seemed to me as a child, as an 8-year-old, that body language was actually pretty reliable. If kids wanted to play, they would welcome you with a smile. If a store owner didn't appreciate you touching the toys and stuff, they would scowl at you and so forth. And that was pretty authentic, and I relied on that a lot it, until I learned English. But I also found that the consistency of nonverbals, that in almost any setting, no matter who you talk to or who you were observing, whether it was people standing in line at the bus in Miami Beach. I lived near 73rd Street, and there was a bus stop there, and I'd watch them interact with each other, and or sitting down to dinner. There was a reliability to body language, and I just seemed to be geared for that, because my mother would tell me, You were always sensitive to what everybody was sort of feeling." And I think, nowadays we would say, well, he showed empathic qualities. As a kid, it's, you don't even know what that is. I think as a kid, it was just, I'm really sensitive to making observations. And I think, and I think that nails it, is just making observations and then trying to decipher it. I think a lot of us see things, but we don't really observe. And then when we run into people that are really observant, and they're the grandmothers that come up to you and put an arm around you when you need it, and so forth. They can make a big difference in life. And then obviously, over the years in my job in law enforcement, and I tell this to young agents that I mentor now. I tell them, always remember, yeah, you have a badge and you have credentials and all this stuff, but really what you are is a paid observer. And never forget that the best agents are the best observers. They're not the biggest, they're not the strongest, but the guys that are really good at observing, they're going to do terrific in their job.
So, a very broad question to start, Joe. What does it mean to be a great observer? What does that look like? What are the characteristics? Walk me through that. I'm sure we could do a whole podcast probably just on that, but what does it look like?
Yeah, that would be fun. I know you do a lot of work with young people, but in essence, I think it is that most of us are taught to look. Even my parents who said, look left, look right before you cross the street. But observing is a little bit more than that. How fast is the vehicle traveling? What kind of make is it? Is it a sports car being driven by a teenager? And of course now, um, the thing I'm looking for is, are they on the phone? Just the other day, at a crosswalk, a pedestrian got hit by a slow moving car who was engaged on the phone, and so now we have to sort of enlarge what we're looking for. But observation is decoding. It's not just looking. It's really taking into account, um, what we may take for granted, how that child walks with the parent or the caregiver. Are they being dragged? Is the hold very tight? Um, or are they, casually and relaxed, walking with each other? One of the in one of my classes, I said the simplest example is, I say, when I see a person walking with a dog, forget the dog. Look at the tension that the dog walker has on the leash. If that tension is high, you've got to worry because that energy is transferred. And if that leash is nice and relaxed, you really never have to worry about the dog. And so it's about making observations that are more detailed, but it's also, DJ, about validating. And that's one of the things I always emphasize. You were nice enough to hold my book up earlier. It doesn't matter that you read it. I want everybody to, if you read what everybody is saying, that's great. I want you to personally validate it. Every day validated so that you never have, like as myself, how do you get to that higher level? When you validate it, you don't have to think about it. If you realize that, a certain behavior has a certain meaning or a collection of meanings, right? So you can furrow this area up here is called the glabella. You can furrow it when you're focused, when you're thinking about something, when you're troubled by something, when you're trying to um, decipher something, or when you have issues with somebody. So now you have a constellation. But if you can go out and in context validate it and say, "Oh, I've seen it before in this instance and this," then you never have to think about it. It will literally, and I know you're an aficionado of nonverbals. It will literally run like software in the back of your mind. You don't have to think about it as say, look, there's an issue here. There's something else. I may not know it precisely, but I know that at a minimum, where we look for comfort and discomfort, we're seeing discomfort, and so there must be something behind it. Yeah.
When talking to, global leading experts like you and Voss and some of those guys, I really like to
All
start the
right.
conversation, Joe, with just demystifying some of the myths. There's probably dozens, but if you were to come up with, let's say, two or three of the myths before we dive deeper into some of the content,
Sure.
Joe, what would those be? Some of those myths?
Yeah, and that's a question that I'm not asked often enough. There's a lot of myths about body language which have been spread over the years. The one you often hear is, well, if somebody's sitting there with their arms crossed, they really don't want you to be there. They're not comfortable with you. Well, that's just nonsense. The fact that we cross our arms is really a way of comforting ourselves. I wrote an article for Psychology Today at their request, and I said, "Look, most of the time, this is a self hug. It's self comforting. Even when we are angry, right? We may do it, but we do it not to protect ourselves, but because it's comforting." And so that's one of the myths. The other myth is that, if you touch your nose as you answer a question or you touch your lips, you're lying. And I literally remember, a sergeant. before I became an FBI agent, I was a police officer, and I went through the Utah Police Academy. And I remember a sergeant standing in front of this group of young police officers and saying, "Absolutely true. If they answer a question and they touch their nose or their mouth, they're lying." Oh my gosh. You know how how much mental Clorox I had to use over the years to get that out of my mind, because that was absolutely, I may have just coined something there. I mean, it was like, get it out of your mind, get it out. This is not, it was nonsense. And so there's a lot of myths about lying. There's myths about that if somebody looks up and to the left and then looks to the right, that they're being deceptive. There's been 27 studies, as my good friend David Matsumoto out in San Francisco has pointed out, that say, there's just no science to that. It's and we say, well, they're just myths. Yeah, but myths are dangerous because I looked at 261 DNA exonerations. And what's interesting about that, first of all, the initial work was done by other people. I just followed up on it. Was that in looking at those cases, not one police officer could identify the truth, but they were all convinced that these innocent people were lying. And it's easy to point a finger at them, but I think it's because of what they were taught. Because I remember going through the system where different police academies, they say, "Oh yeah, if they avoid eye contact, they're lying or they're hiding something." And I said, whoa, time out. What are you talking about? Just think about African American children who are taught to look down and look contrite when they are in the face of an authority figure. Can you imagine if you attribute deception to that and what the ramifications are? Yeah, actually, I can imagine that. And not realizing that they are being respectful by looking down and looking contrite. The same thing with a lot of Latin American children. I was brought up that if your father was chastising you, you better not be looking up at him with an attitude. Um, and so myths are nothing to ignore because they can have consequences. I remember post-trial talking to some jurors. This is after I retired, and I was doing some consulting with some attorneys, and come to find out that they had made their decisions of guilt based on their beliefs that they couldn't see the person's hands, and so they thought they were being deceptive. And it's like, oh my goodness, this has real world implications, because a lot of us, when we're nervous, whether we're innocent or guilty, most of us don't attend trial every day. And so when you're called as a witness, you may be holding your hands, rubbing them, clutching, which is a pacifying behavior. But to attach guilt to that, yeah, that it does have real world ramifications, and it has real world ramifications for leaders. That we say, a leader, and this, you've interviewed some of the best. How you snagged them, that I want to know. But these are not just thought leaders, but real executives out there, and they don't realize you're being watched every second. You're being watched before you reach the building. You're being watched when you're walking from the parking lot, when you're walking to get a coffee. While you are getting a coffee, you're being watched, and people are drawing inferences at best. Right? Because I teach, we don't judge. Our job is not to judge. We draw inferences to see what information is being transmitted. But there are people who make horrible judgments. And, and I'm just intolerant of that, because I really jumped down on some of the people out there who claim to be body language experts, and they're making these really not very good judgments. And I say, how dare you? The science doesn't even allow us to make those judgments. All we can say is that we saw this behavior, and it's either comfort or discomfort, or there's confidence or lack thereof. But for leaders, you have to remember there are a lot of myths out there, and you may be walking down the hallway thinking about something, but what kind of assessment are people making as they're walking down the hallway? So it's an important question. I wish more people would ask me that, because the consequences are profound.
Yeah, it sounds to me like there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't one rule that matches for everything. Somebody's crossed arms could mean something to somebody different, just like the word family means something for somebody differently. So then I'm curious if that's the
Yeah.
truth on there is no one size fits all. I can only imagine, Joe, that makes your job 10x harder. I'm curious, what was the most challenging part of your job knowing that there's not one size fits all. When you see this
Right.
red flag, that means he's lying. That's not true. So what was the biggest
Right.
challenge for you?
Well, the challenge is always, number one is, you hate it when you're just given a photograph. And I get these all the time. I get emails from all over the world. My interns hate it. It's like, you got another one, and they're funny. It's a woman and a man, or two women together, whatever, and say, "Can you tell if my boyfriend or my girlfriend really loves me?"
Oh my
No,
god.
I can't. No, if I could, I wouldn't have to write books. But they just want the impossible. But in my job, you sometimes have very few seconds to draw an inference. I'll give you an example. I'm interviewing a subject, or he wasn't even as a subject. He was actually at the time considered a witness. And so we go to his house, and you probably read it. And he's smoking a cigarette. Now, I expect people will get nervous around an FBI agent. I mean, look at us. We have the uniform on. You've seen television. It can't be a good thing if the FBI is there. But you try to calm things down. But all of a sudden, I mentioned the name of someone who is living not in Florida where we were at, but in Germany. Okay, so that's what, 4,000 kilometers away. But the cigarette shakes every time I mention this guy's name. Now, the job is on me. I'm getting paid to observe, but then, as every executive knows, one thing is making an observation. Now, what do I do with it? And so my follow-up was, well, what does that really mean, a shaking cigarette? Does that mean that they went out partying together? Did they, were they taking, because at the military at the time in Germany, the guys would get, the men and the women, the guys, they would all get like a food stamp supplement, so that they could buy things that were higher price on the economy and so forth. Sometimes they would sell those to civilians, which is illegal. But and so you just don't know what's going on, but it registered as nervousness in his hand. And so the hard part is, now what do I do with that? And so what I found is, back away, get them to relax again, and try to get more context. When were you there? Where did you serve? What was your income? Things like that. Test it again and see if it causes stress again. And in this case, it did. And but you have to be careful how far you go in making that assessment. Certainly, I didn't think he was lying. I wouldn't know. I don't know anything about him. Certainly, I didn't think there was anything nefarious. All I know is that the mention of a name caused psychological discomfort. So the only thing you're left with, I'll just talk to him again, and if he'll have me, which he gladly did, is I'll come back and talk to him some more, and in those conversations, I lucked out. He happened to reveal by showing off that the money that he was spending on parties and drugs and alcohol and so forth exceeded his $89 a month from the military. And as we say in the FBI, we call that a clue. So the question is, where's he getting that money from? And so one thing led to another. And so when when I deal, in fact, I was just in New York the other day coaching a very senior executive. I said, be careful what you do with this knowledge that you're getting until you've learned to validate it, but never assume that you know the answer. And that you can never know. You can see somebody who is sullen and walking stoically, quietly. They may just have lost somebody in their family. Do not assume that, oh, they must be up to something and so forth. So I think for me and what I teach and what I coach is use it as an opportunity to get to know the person, explore further, be empathetic, even with criminals. I remember a 2.5 hour, no, it was almost 3 hour drive from Kingman, Arizona back to Phoenix with a pedophile. And I remember half of my brain is saying, okay, this person is really bad. He'd already been convicted. He had just run away. But the other half of me said, be empathetic. He's a human being and listen to what he has to say. And in doing that, he actually revealed things that we didn't know anything about. So I think we can use the way I use nonverbals. I get this question all the time. Are you analyzing me? No. No. I mean, part of me wants to joke and say, sorry, you're not that important. But we're all important. But I say, but I am constantly aware of whether you're comfortable or uncomfortable. That you can be assured of. And if we use that to then further communication and make sure that people are always comfortable to talk, to communicate their sentiments. And that's really how I use it. I do not, I want the public to understand this. I don't sit there and think about whether somebody is lying or not. That is the last thing I do. That's the last thing I did as an agent, because you just never know. But if you just focus on, are we communicating in harmony? Do I sense that there's an issue? Do I sense that something is off? Then that's an opportunity for me to explore and communicate. And I may never know what it was, but if you're that sensitive, you'd be amazed at how far you'll get. And honestly, I attribute that every bit of my success in my career, not to cleverness, but to a skill set that somehow I managed to acquire without really ever trying.
I think it speaks volumes, Joe, to you as a guy of your caliber to say the words "don't assume," because you've probably seen several different or several of the same types of scenarios. It would be easy for you to assume, the cigarette is shaking, he's lying, he's a criminal, blah blah blah. But you said the opposite. You said I take a step back and actually start asking more questions. When I talked to Abby about this was actually interesting for me as I
Yeah.
began my public speaking career about a year ago. One of the things I was struggling with, Joe, is that I said to Abby, it seemed like my audience, and granted they are kids, but they just stare at me blankly. There's no head tilt, there's no
Yeah.
nodding. They just and they're just high school kids, right? And my part of it is what I told Abby was I feel like they're bored or they're not engaged or listening. And she said, don't assume that, because sometimes when people are deeply concentrating, they don't have a lot of facial expressions. They might be stoic. They're just looking ahead at
Yeah.
you. So that was a huge eye-opening experience for me to understand. And it also took away the jitters of, how are they feeling? I don't know how they're feeling. No, take it with some positivity. They're just concentrated. So the assumption is big.
DJ, of all the crowds you took on, high school kids are the toughest.
No.
They're buddy. You should have called me first because I've been giving speeches for 40 years and I still find them tough. You're talking about Dr. Abby Maronio, who's absolutely brilliant, and she's exactly right. You have to remember these kids have to sit in a classroom all day where basically there is no reward for any behavior other than sitting still and pliantly looking at the teacher. I cannot. It's almost instilled. I remember in high school, uh, we had these great windows, and I was just fascinated by what was going on outside the classroom. And boy, I would be reeled in like a marlin. Mr. Navarro, oh, here we go. Eyes straight ahead. Please sit up and that explains a lot of my neuroses right there. But but she's right. You shouldn't assume that, because especially when you see that you have a room full of people that are like this and you realize, okay, what's the age group? This age group is still learning how to comport themselves. They know how to comport themselves around each other. They know how to comport themselves when they're out playing. The fact that they're in front of a speaker, they probably haven't figured out what is the best way to do that, and they will achieve that. But you're right. We have to be careful with assumptions, and we have to be. I'll be honest. We have to be careful with the sort of gurus that are out there who are saying, "Oh well, when the Sussexes go out for a walk, Prince Harry and they're grabbing each other's hands, it means this or that." I have heard. I have to be careful with my language. I have heard so much rubbish in the last few years over these inane comments. The fact of the matter is that all we can say is they like to hold hands, they touch hands. That when we don't like each other, we tend to distance ourselves or we touch with fingertips. But when hands are intertwined, in all likelihood, people are getting along just fine. But some of the stuff that is out there, so we have to deal with coming to the wrong assessment because we don't understand all the facts. It's like that, like those photos I told you about, and I try to explain to them, we don't know what happened 5 seconds before or 20 minutes before.
Right.
For all we know, when this picture was taken at the beach, they had problems parking because the meter wasn't working, and they're worried about the meter maid coming, and they just want to take on and on and on. But I think the best thing that we can do, and I know, and I can't wait for your book to come out. I hope it's okay to mention that, is observe the world with the eyes of a child, which in essence is what I do. I am still utterly curious, childlike, and learn to interpret the world, to ask questions, and seek to decode, well, why does it do that, or why is that this way? Not to be judgmental, but one, to satisfy curiosity, but also to be more aligned in understanding what another person is going through. Then I think we're more effective communicators. Amy Cuddy, who's a good friend of mine, she's a lovely human being, and I've enjoyed her support over the years at Harvard, where I used to go every year. She says, nothing is as satisfactory as a leader than strength, right? And empathy. In essence, if I am capturing her sentiments on that, the combination of, you can rely on me, I will run interference for you as a leader. I'm not going to hover over you, but I will run interference for you so that you can succeed, but I will also be empathetic, and I will understand that there will be failure. I understand there will be mistakes. I understand that at times you will be exhausted, and at times you will need somebody to put their arm around you. Those two qualities, wow. You know, you think about a great leader, there you go. There you go. Because often we think, oh, they shaved 10% in costs. They were able to fire all these people. They were able to do this and to that. That's only one facet of being a good human. You know, the other quality of a great leader, and people forget this, and I think DJ, especially with the young people that you deal a lot with, is one of the tasks of a great leader is to attenuate fear. That we all have fear. Now we don't say it because my gosh, here I'm a man in my suit and I don't fear anything. Yeah, I actually fear a lot of things, but I don't say it. Most people don't say it. And but the great leader is looking out for, because the brain only understands fear, right? The amygdala is looking for things that can hurt you, and so it deals with fear. It doesn't deal with nuance. And the leader, right? I remember reading about Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and he's going out there to the airborne troops that are first going to drop in France, and he understands fear. He was a soldier, and by his calm demeanor, he comes out and says, "Boys, everything's gonna, we'll get through this. We'll work this out." Had a great calming effect. Alexander the Great did the same thing. The great leader is empathetic and understands that one of his jobs is to deal with fear. Hey, we're going to be taken over by another company. Deal with the fear. There's an acquisition. Deal with the with that. Right, teach them to write it out and be at the forefront of doing that. Then those are great attributes for leadership, and for young people to know that, yeah, you're looking, oh, today's class is we're going to climb a rope. Well, I remember the first time I climbed a rope and I said, why are we doing that? Earth is perfectly fine. Terra firma is good. Most animals are just fine on Earth. Why are we going to, I think it was 27 feet up? And it's like, little hands, big rope. That sometimes we need somebody to put their hand on us and say, it's going to be all right. You can do it.
Cool.
You can do it.
As
And I think that's a great sign of a great leader.
As you were talking about childlike curiosity, I'm over here nodding and smiling because, Joe, I teach what's called the 7 tactical skills of mental performance. And the first skill is curiosity. I believe in asking better questions to get better answers and how important that is. So that's skill number 1.
Yeah.
The 7th skill that I really want to get into with you today
Yeah.
is unshakable self-confidence. Now, when I'm working with high school athletes, the
Right.
thing that I see and hear the most is I'm just not confident, whether it's in school, whether it's at home, or most commonly on the field of play.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious. One of my mentors, Brian Kane, is a mental performance coach, and something that he always talks about with body language is that it's important to be big, tall, and bulletproof. And I've kind of been using that from him. And he says the focus is really on the idea that the mind will follow the body. So if you
Right.
want to be confident, you just need to act confident. It's not a feeling; it's instead an
Yeah.
action. So I just want to really dive into this topic with you. Confidence for kids, confidence for athletes. Can you influence it by your body language? And if so, what does that look like?
What it looks like, and it looks like to me, is it's both body and mind. Your we know this from the 1800s, where people who worked in factories, at the end of the day, their hands and arms would continue to do the repetitive gestures, because now you had this muscle memory. And I think it's a combination of things. I remember as an agent going through the FBI Academy, and I know there's been a lot of shows about that. And, and the first time you're told to do a dynamic entry into a dark room where you can't see anything, and they said, well, you have to go in quickly and hit the corners because the bad guys can sit in the corner. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, what about if he's right in front, your mind starts going there. And so you have this tremendous lack of confidence. And we had really good instructors, and they said, we're going to walk through it. And and then when I came on to the SWAT team in Puerto Rico, and then became SWAT team commander, I said, we did this methodically, is we walk through it.
Mm.
Walk through everything that you do. And I remember in football practice in Miami, that oftentimes the coach would have us walk us through it. And I think it helps, especially young people, to walk through what you're going to do. Let the brain experience left foot forward, right foot forward, arms coming up, whatever it is that you're going to do. I have seen volleyball coaches, especially in some Brazilian coaches when I was stationed in Brazil, where they would not let players play with the ball.
Mm.
Well, it is like, wait, volleyball? No, you're going to pretend the ball is coming. You're going to walk to it. Your arms are going to go forward. Your hands are going to be placed precisely. And so it's this precise, precision, repetitive building up. And I think that goes a long way to building both the confidence. Your brain is reinforced positively every time you do it. And then once you have that confidence and you have that muscle memory, then comes the speed. And then comes the speed. And now the fact that you can transact this perfectly, you're not getting yelled at by, oh, that was a lousy tackle. Well, if you had showed me how to do a good tackle, I wouldn't be doing a bad one. This is called myelination. So myelination, the neurons and the connections between areas of the brain, the more you do something, right, and you do it right, the stronger the connection. It's called myelination. But if you're doing it wrong, you can have a strong myelination, but you're going to be lousy at it.
Wrong way. Mm-hmm.
You've been coached the wrong way. And now to break from that is terrible. So I think the easiest way for young people is, let's start by walking through it, building that confidence. I talk to a lot of executives who hate, all right? They're really good at what they do, but they hate public speaking. And I said, well, I've got this 30-minute speech. I go, 30-minute speech? Buddy, why would you start with a 30-minute speech? That's like putting you in an F1 series vehicle. How about we rehearse the first line? Let's get the first line right. I remember coaching attorneys, and they said, well, yeah, I want to rehearse with a mock jury, we want to do a complete trial. No, we're not. No, we're not. First of all, you bore me. And second of all, you're going to bore the audience. I said, how about we try a 12-minute opening statement? And if you can succeed with that, then we'll go forward. And that's exactly what we did. I refused to go through a complete mock trial. Because if you can't get the opening statement right, and have the confidence, and you might find this helpful. One of the things I tell young people is, let's say you're called up to say something in front of a group and you're not prepared. Just tell yourself, number one, nobody wants me to fail. because that could be them.
I like that.
Number two, think of something that is true and accurate. Okay? Something that is true and accurate, a fact, right? And number three, think about how I want to say that. Do I want to say it quietly or as a bullet point? Like you could say, did you know that orcas are actually dolphins? Okay. Figure out how you want to say it. And that's it. That's all you need to do. And if you can just do that with one fact and with how you want to deliver it, everything else can follow, because your brain will have confidence from being able to deliver that one thing. And I have found with people who struggle with that it actually helps them.
Yeah. I'm a big believer that we can use our body language as our advantage. It doesn't have to be a disadvantage. We can actually use it as our advantage. And I don't know if there's science behind it, Joe, or not, but I like to think that we can actually alter our physiology by the way we portray ourselves. And for athletes that I work with, some of the things we talk about or I like to get into and explore is not showing weakness, because your bodies will buy into that. And if
Yeah.
you have your head down, or you have that furrow, your physiology is going to follow it. So
I agree.
can we use our body language from an athletic standpoint? Can we use our body language as an advantage instead, even though I'm dog tired in my heart and I know my lungs
Yeah.
are breathing, but
Yeah.
instead, Joe, I show big body language and that can change my physiology. Is there
Here's
truth to that?
here's here's an easy one. Here's an easy one, and you're exactly right, DJ. And I've looked at your stuff, and it's solid. Get that high school team. When you go out, I know you're going to be looking down at the ground because you're used to looking out down at the ground. I don't want you to look at the ground. I want you to look at the highest bleacher as you run out. And what you find is they feel different. They feel different. And there've been different social experiments where you put a pencil in somebody's across the mouth, and it's similar to smiling, and then all of a sudden when you ask them how do you feel, they rate themselves higher and so forth. You can definitely change your body chemistry, right? You can definitely change how you feel about something by how you carry yourself. The coach saying, we are not looking down. We, ladies and gentlemen, do not look down. We look forward or we look up, and we run out and we sprint. And in fact, the physicality of it displaces all that fear and apprehension. One of the exercises that I have people do, and which goes to this, is like if you're in the green room waiting to go give a speech and you're getting really nervous and so forth, stop thinking about it. Find a wall, lean into it like you're holding up a van that's about to tip over, and try to hold that position for about 15 seconds. And what you find is the brain can only deal with one thing at a time. And it goes from worrying to survival. And the minute it goes to survival, all of a sudden, there's a cascade of chemicals that are released, which say your muscles need more energy. You need blood sugar. You need, all this stuff. And now all of a sudden, you feel differently, and after about 12 seconds you step away, and then it's like, well, worrying isn't my priority anymore. Now I maybe even sweating and so forth. Your physiology has changed, your brain has changed. There's a lot of things. You're absolutely right, DJ. There's a lot of things that we can do, but obviously nothing is as powerful as preparation. Nothing is as powerful as rehearsal. And I remember being on the SWAT team, and we had a SWAT operation in Lakeland, and I remember we're taking string out and we're putting it in the ground to diagram the hotel room. and we're about a mile away, and we're actually walking through rehearsing how we're going to capture this top 10 fugitive so that nobody gets hurt. And it's like, well, we train every month. Why are we doing this? Exactly. Because by doing it, it calms us down, it prepares us, it makes us think, and it actually helps the mind to relax. And so we never stop rehearsing. I remember I was in Las Vegas years ago, and I met a gentleman who was kind enough to, well, I won't say who the comedian is, but he had for 11 years, he had the #1 show. And I didn't know he introduced me to him. I don't know what to say, it's like, hi, I'm Joe. And I said, I, yeah. And well, I'll say it. I said, Mr. Seinfeld, I said, do you ever get nervous? And he said something I'll never forget. He said, a comedian that is not nervous is not funny. Think about that. If you're not nervous, if you're not a little bit on that edge, you're winging it, you're taking your audience for granted, you're not gonna cut it. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are. Now, it doesn't mean nervousness to the point where it inhibits your performance, because one of the things I found, especially with the SWAT teams, that as we got ready to go from yellow to green, so now we have the authority to move forward, is that we would actually become calmer, because now we need to use all our senses. So now our movements are smoother. We're taking our time. We want to make sure nobody gets hurt. And you actually, as a lot of sports, well, you've talked to a lot of sports people, tell you they get in the zone. You get in ill-defined, but you get in the zone where you're not going to let anything bother you, but you're not doing things, you're not being jittery or being erratic in any way. Yeah.
Something I really loved from your book, the most honest part of the body is the lower body. I thought this was very interesting. And ever since reading it, Joe, being at the gym, where I
Yeah.
spend most of my time just watching people's lower body, it is actually, for the listeners out there, take some time to watch it because it's comical, man. Some people, I found some people, something I see a lot that I never thought I'd see, they cross their legs when they stand. I'm like, thinking to myself, like, why is that comfortable? But I've seen it time and time again. And then the other
Yeah.
one that I really want to just crash with you is, this is so
Yeah.
interesting to me, and I find myself doing it too, Joe, and I almost feel wrong doing it now, but having
Yeah.
conversations with people, and instead of facing each other, Joe, we're
Yeah.
slightly 45'd out and we're looking at the weight room.
Anything.
It doesn't even, we're not even watching anything. It's not like we're watching a game. We're just not facing each other. And it sounds so silly when you start to talk about these things, but they're real. Talk to me about why the lower body's so honest, and what can my listeners learn from
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that last example is that because you're comfortable around each other, you can have that high degree of comfort where you don't have to look at each other. Study after study, Albert Bree out of Europe found that people who lie actually engage in more eye contact because they want to
Interesting.
make sure you get it.
Mm.
So with your friends and buddies, you can afford to. My neighbor and I, when every time we're talking about baseball, and so we're both looking in the distance. We're not even looking at each other. But to answer the question, why the feet are so honest is because our faces have social contracts uh, for uh, for eternity. We have looked at each other's faces to determine, are you smiling, are you approachable, and so forth. But the feet are more concerned with survival, and so we evolved so that the feet will always react to our benefit. So we may see somebody we don't like, but we'll go, "Hi, how are you?" But your feet don't have that social contract. They're concerned with survival. So your brain says, face away, turn your feet away. And so the feet are very honest when we're happy. Tell a child, down the street, these kids when they get a new gift or, something, you can look at their feet and they get happy feet, right? You can see the emotions. You can see when they're having a tough day. You can see when they don't want to go. They literally drag. The feet are so honest. The face can be very dishonest, as every poker player knows, and so forth. But the feet don't know how to do it, and so when we're comfortable around each other at the gym, you look and you see, oh, they crossed their legs. They're so comfortable that the brain is saying it's okay to be off balance because you're literally off balance,
Mhm.
right? But, somebody walks up to somebody at the gym, they start talking, and then you notice that one of their feet starts pointing either to the next machine they're going to or to the exit. And they're telegraphing, I got to get back to work. I don't have time to. So the feet are very honest. You see it in elevators when immediately somebody gets on and your feet, it's almost embarrassing. It's like your feet immediately move you to another corner. And it's like, well, I didn't really want to do that, but I did it because my feet, they have a brain all their own. And and stuff like that. But I always look at the feet, and I encourage people to look at the feet, because of their honesty. And remember, look how many times I remember as a young teenager, we were afraid to maybe say something or with somebody we were interested in, but in the pool, our feet would play footsies and stuff. So, yeah, the feet are very honest. Yeah.
See, and I'm over here, Joe, thinking that we should be striving to have our feet facing our counterpart because that shows respect, shows engagement, shows good listening skills. Are you saying that maybe that we shouldn't aim for that?
No, you can. It depends on circumstances. You run into somebody in the hallway, and sure, your feet should be facing each other. But let me tell you this: if somebody else approaches, and the true way to know if those two want you to join them, let's say you're the person approaching them, is not if they turn their upper body, because they might say, "Hey, Bill, how are you?" Or DJ, nice to see you. It's if they turn their feet
Mm,
and angle towards you.
mhm.
Interestingly enough, that's how we communicate that. If one or more of those feet turns towards you, that's the welcoming behavior, not whether or not they turned and said hello. And oftentimes, we'll have somebody that we work with and doesn't seem to get it, and they just barge right into what's a private conversation, and but they don't realize that they weren't sending, the signals weren't being received, and that signal wasn't the face, it was oftentimes the feet. But that's a good one. And obviously you can see people who are getting along, people who are really into each other by the proximity of the feet.
Interesting. You also brought up poker, and you have a cool video on YouTube talking about the body language of poker. I grew up watching poker with my dad. You worked with Phil Hellmuth. We were a fan of him as well. I'm curious, what are some of the things or the stories, or just can we open up the world of poker? Everybody thinks of the poker face, and the lower body actually plays more of a role. I'll let you just take the stage. Talk to me a little about what you learned in the poker world.
Yeah. So, a funny story. 2004, and Annie Duke and I just met on a Discovery Channel set. I didn't know anything about her, but I found her very well. First of all, she's bright. I mean, like IQ bright, blew my brain away. And so she said, "Well, I've been reading your FBI law enforcement bulletin articles for years." And I go,
Cool.
"Why? Why would you do that?" Because only law enforcement officers read those, and usually when they're in the latrine. So, and she says, "Because a lot of what you write about applies to poker." And I said, "Okay, well, that's interesting." And then about a month later, I get this phone call from a guy I never heard of him. And he says, "Hey, Joe," he's kind of cavalier, and says, "I'm putting on a World Series of Poker Academy in Las Vegas, and I want you to come and teach." And I said, "I don't know who you are, and I'm not interested." And I hung up on him. And so I shouldn't do that. Then his manager called me and says, "No, this is Phil Hellmuth's manager, and he's for real. And there's money in this." And and I said, "I don't play poker. I've never played poker in my family. My father, it wasn't that he was religious. It was just that, he wasn't about games." And I actually thought, do I want to get involved in this world, not knowing anything about it, and how would I be perceived, FBI agent teaching poker players? And I said, "Listen, if let's just get this clear. I don't know anything about pokers, but I know how the brain works. And if you can deal with that, that's fine." So they fly me out, and imagine this: you got TJ Cloutier, you got Phil Hellmuth, you got you got all this poker royalty there. Antonio Sfanderi, all these people that I don't know anything about, and they're sitting in the front row, and they're doing something they tell me that has never been seen in Vegas before: taking notes. Because these guys are the experts. They don't take notes. They know it all. And they're taking 3, 4, 5 pages of notes. And they told me, I said, we've never heard these things, because up to that point you had Mike Carroll's book, which I think he had like 40 or 50 tells or something like that. And now I'm taking it to 186 tells. Things they never thought of, like neck touching, ventilating behaviors, the spread of the fingers, the hiding of the thumb. You look at on the river, you look at the cards and you put your hands down and you're hiding your thumb. You are so weak that you may need a respirator. Looking at the feet and the leg bounce, and so like this was totally new to them. And the hardest part was, how do we go out and validate it? And then when they began to validate it, in some ways it changed the game of poker, because then you began, when I was telling them about the steeple, which is really, and we know this, because when we look at children who are born blind and they've never seen it, they perform it. This is a display of confidence, right? The steeple. It's a confidence display. And so all of a sudden, we're having people go all in, and they're steepling. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, nobody's betting. They're picking up on this. So it changed the way people bet. And then later it also changed. People had to be careful that they didn't steeple accidentally and then tried to hide it. So it changed that. And then about 2 years later, Phil asked me to write a book with him about body language, and that was it. And it was like, I still don't know how to really play poker. I don't know how they do the math and how the statistic. The pros, they're computers. They can tell you, they can look at what's been laid out, and they'll give you the statistics of the probability of they just spit this stuff out. Greg Raymer, who was there, became a friend. He won I think 2003, 2004. Attorney by training. That guy's is a brainiac. He can give you numbers and quotes and statistics, and my brain doesn't work like that. And my brain is so simple. Are you comfortable or uncomfortable? That's all I care about. That's
And
all I care about.
And as a
Uh,
novice, when you're watching on ESPN or whatever, you don't really see those ins and the outs. And when I watched your video on it as I was prepping for this interview,
yeah,
it was so cool to watch you break down the differences of even the subtle things of hands on the table, hands off the table, or
yeah.
really jittery. Or you tell a great story in your book about it wasn't the upper body when you were watching on ESPN, but you could see
Right.
their lower body bouncing, which told you what they had a really good hand, but they didn't
They had
see
a
that
strong hand.
at
Yeah.
the table, but you could see it on the screen.
Yeah, because I remember when the book came out and people were saying, "Well, if they're under the table, then how do you see it?" You haven't even taken time to validate it. Bounce your leg and you notice your clothing shakes. I mean, you can see this. And that was the point, is people weren't realizing what they were giving away, or when they first get their cards, oh, this is really great, and you see they're caging their cards with their hands and they're really being overprotective, and then as the hand unfolds, they begin to touch the cards with the tips of the fingers, and like it was dirty. And I said, you're missing this stuff. Or the other thing that changed the game a bit, and even though Greg Raymer and others didn't agree with it, was never look at your cards when it's your turn, because you're guaranteeing that you have
All eyes
eight
on you.
sets of eyes on
Mm.
you. So now everybody's going to see your reaction, and you may have pupillary constriction, and they'll pick up on it, or your nares may dilate the minute you realize I'm going to have the nuts here. Um, so we changed that, and the other thing I think eventually, and you saw it certainly with Phil, who was a very good student. I said, Phil, the human brain is funny. If it doesn't detect movement, it moves on. And so he developed, I coached him to what's called the perch. I mean, they at one time they called it the Navarro perch. Please don't call it that, because I'd rather my name be associated with other things. And that's where you hold your chin with your thumbs, and then you put your fist in front of you and you hold very still. What happens is, in the more primitive area of the brain, we have what's called the orientation reflex, and it tracks any movement. In fact, it's so powerful that you can be in a vegetative state, um, and you'll be able to track people coming into a room even though you're in a vegetative state. That's how primitive it is. It's somewhere just above the spinal cord, where it begins to get into the more primitive area of the brain. And I said, if you hold still, no one will pick up your tells. They will literally be compelled by nature to then move on to the next player who is moving and
Mhm.
engaging and so
Mhm.
forth. And he became, in essence, a very boring player, but he became more successful because fewer people could read him. And that drove a lot of people nuts, because there was nothing to pick up. You couldn't see the lips, right? You couldn't see the lip biting, the disappearing lips. You couldn't see the upturned nose. I can't tell you how many people I would literally walk through um, the casino, and I would be picking up tells 3 tables over, and to the point where somebody said, "Keep him away." It's just, it was like the pestilence. And of course, I never used it against any player, but people were just giving away tells too easily. I remember there was a player named, I think his name was Farha, where he had a marginal hand and he kept revealing it because he kept tucking at his shirt, and you realize the skin temperature changes at 1/250th of a second, because the brain is saying fear, danger, apprehension. So at a minimum, he's marginal, or he's weak, but he's not strong. And he's constantly doing that. And it's like they're missing these behaviors. So people associated that with nervousness, or maybe something you do all the time, like a tick. It wasn't in this case. And so that was a lot of fun. And And I met some really interesting. I learned one thing: they'll bet on anything. I won't tell you
Any
who it
hand?
was. On anything. We were being introduced. I'll never forget this because, you got to remember, I started out as a busboy at the Deauville Hotel in Miami Beach, and then became a waiter. So I have an appreciation for little tips. Back then they would leave you 15 cents, and that was heaven. And but poker players, I won't name you, but we're being introduced, and there's a line of us. I think there were 7 of us, and I'm at the end, right? I don't really know these folks very well, and the 2 guys next to me, I won't name them, said $100. The next shirt through that door is red. It's like, well, first of all, what are the chances that somebody's going to wear a red shirt? I would have gone with white, pastel green,
Sure,
anything
sure.
but red. And sure enough,
Oh, no shit.
and these guys are, handing out money. Like, I go, yeah, God bless you.
Yeah.
It's an interesting mentality. It's a very interesting mentality. But super smart people. I don't think you can play poker at that level without really being very, very smart. And I think that's one of the most underrated things about that, is that you don't realize. I was talking to Greg Raymer one time, and I said, so these tournaments, they last 8, 9 days. You're paying 10, 11 hours, 12 hours. I mean, it's exhausting. And then we were making calculations based on 8 players and making decisions and so forth. I estimated, I think I threw this out there, that to make the final table, you had to make 250,000 decisions, observations and decisions. I mean, how many jobs require that? Because you've got to read every player and every hand, every decision being made, and you've got to decode the eyes, the feet. What are they doing? What are they doing with their cards? How are they betting? Are they betting slow or fast? And then all of that, easily, we came up with a number. It was like 250,000 decisions. And it's like, that's hard work, buddy.
Wow.
That is really hard work. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, I want to close down by talking about your latest
Yeah.
book, and I have it ordered. It's a great title. Be Exceptional. Master the 5 traits that set extraordinary people apart. I would be
Yeah.
curious to hear if we could just dive into one of the 5, maybe your favorite, and we close down that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
And thanks for mentioning. This is one of the books, of the 14 books I've written, many of them with Tony Shara and other folks. I think this is my favorite because I often wrote about stuff I'd picked up on my career, but I had late in my career, I remembered that I had done over 13,000 interviews, and you get to talk to a lot of people. And most of those people that I interviewed were really great, decent people. People working on farms. This little lady who's blind in Brazil, who makes things by hand and so forth. And you begin to pick up on what makes for exceptional people. Not great, not truly exceptional, like you really enjoy being in their presence. We've talked about observation, which is one of the traits that's there. I think the most important trait that exceptional people had was that no matter where they found themselves in life, and oftentimes the abject poverty. I talked to a farmer who they didn't have electricity even in the 70s. That's how poor they were, but they changed their life around. And you realize, well, what did they do? And the first thing they did was they had mastery over themselves. And that's the first item in the book, is they established mastery. They said, no matter what I'm faced with, I'm going to be in charge of me. No excuses, not going to blame, not going to point fingers. It's I'm in charge of me, and I'm going to take care of me, and I'm going to do everything I can. And they created their own apprenticeship program. This one farmer who uh, eventually, because they were subleasing the property from another people, he says, I'm going to learn everything about cattle, and I'm going to learn everything about I think it's called animal husbandry. I don't know if it's still called that, but it was when I was studying it, or talking to him. And I'm going to learn everything about it. I'm going to do better than my father. um, People who taught themselves. Okay, I'm going to go to the library. I'm going to talk to experts along the way. The expectation that society should give you the perfect education is nonsense. Society will give you an education. We don't know the quality of it. We don't know whether you'll pay attention. We don't know if you'll sit there stoically. We don't know if you'll enjoy it. But if you create your own, you're going to do all right. And in a way, I sort of did that myself. School was school, but after school, I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed reading, and I found that if you read 2 books a week, that's 1,000 books a decade. You can put away a lot of books, and you can put away a lot of learning. And every successful person, whether they learn because their grandmother taught them something or so forth, they mastered themselves so that then they could master a skill or learning. And that's what makes for exceptional individuals to start with. And they have control of their emotions, so they don't let their emotions drive their behavior. If you're letting emotions drive your behavior, then please seek help. And there, unfortunately, I've been in situations where emotionally, I'll be honest with you, and I say this. In 1990, I had a breakdown because I was working 16-hour days. I was working on a very important case, and emotionally, I let it get to me. And that's the minute things changed. I went from being in charge to emotions being charged, and you have to sometimes get help. And I encourage everybody to do that. But you'd be surprised what you can achieve if you stop assuming that, oh, I got an education and that's it. No, that's not it. You've got to go further. You've got to create your own apprenticeship. And I find very few people like yourself, I know, do this. Yeah, I know, when I look at your life, you've created your own apprenticeship. There's no class that teaches you what you know and what you do every day. None. And those that do create that apprenticeship, there's no limits to what they can achieve in life. And that's why when you approach me, would I be on your show? Would I be on your show? Yeah, you encompass everything that Be Exceptional is about. You created show me a university that had taught you how to do everything you do, and there isn't. And there isn't. In the same way that when we look at somebody like Thomas Jefferson and so forth, and say, what university taught him to write the Constitution? There isn't one. Well, why is that? Because certain things require that you apprentice yourself to learning or a skill so that you can do these things. And no university can teach you that.
Great wisdom. Can we close down with the fifth one? I'm very curious. Psychological comfort. I'm going to read it in the book. Don't worry, but I'm curious on what that means. You said it's the secret ingredient.
The secret ingredient, because how do you get people to tell you things on your show? You create psychological comfort.
Got it.
You do it through your prosody, your tone of voice. You got a great voice. You do it by the things that we talk about. It's an interesting concept, and it's a good one to close on. Our brains do not require perfection. People don't understand that. In fact, perfection can lead you to insanity. What our brains seek actually is psychological comfort. And if you understand that, both in yourself and in others, in the service that you provide, then you realize, oh, what I'm doing is in furtherance of them, because the human brain only seeks psychological comfort. And obviously it can go in extremes. Some people take drugs for that comfort. Well, that's the wrong kind. But in essence, the human brain seeks good friends, good friendships, good relationships, something fun to do, something enjoyable. Uh, what we call positive valence in psychology. We don't want negative valence. We just want positive valence, and that's where we thrive. And if you understand that, and the social experiments where you take two gas stations and you lower the lights in one and lower the price, but you increase the lights in the other one and raise the price, and people will go to the one that's better lit. Why is that? It's very simple: psychological comfort. And if you attach yourself to that, and that's what I use nonverbals for. Are we comfortable? And if not, what can I do to make that happen? And thanks for having me on your program.
Yeah, Joe, this was an absolute pleasure. For my listeners out there, where can I point them? Obviously, we have this book that I just read. It's titled "What Everybody Is Saying: an ex-FBI's Agent Guide to Speed Reading People." Go get this. Where else can I point my listeners to support you, to learn from you, etc.?
Yeah, I appreciate that. If you go to joenavarro.net, that takes you to my business website. All my books are there. All the events that I'm involved with are there. And obviously support your local book dealers. I always like to go into the little bookshops. They're happy to order the book. And obviously on Amazon or directly from HarperCollins. But yeah, so I appreciate that, and continued success to you, because I think you're doing some very good things,
Oh,
and
thank you so much.
I appreciate that.
Awesome. Joe, thanks for taking the time.
All right, buddy.